I thought it would be fun to talk about my past lives and to tell you what I've seen in detail and how that has changed the way that I see the world now. And I know some people in the community, some people watching this, will have read a book that I wrote about my past lives. It was a novel, so it was like 90% true to what I've seen of my previous births. But 10% of the novel was fictionalized, so it would be more dramatic and more fun to read. A lot of timelines condensed, and some characters omitted, and some characters made up. So I thought it would be fun to tell you some of the ways that uh, some of what I've actually seen that was different from the book. So this will, I hope, still be interesting to the people who have read that novel, and also share some of the insights that I've gained from seeing those past lives and how it has impacted my practice in this life and helped me step closer and closer toward freedom. And before I go into the detail, this is just a reminder, and I know many of us know this already, but gosh, past lives are not another thing to be clung onto. And whether it's your own past lives that you've seen, or my past lives that you're about to hear about, what matters is the insight that we harvest from them, not the actual what happened in those past lives. And also, one great way of holding all of it lightly is to remember that maybe all of it actually happened, and maybe all of it was just a fever dream, a particularly imaginative meditation I had on the cushion one day. And who knows? There's no way to prove it either way. And that's one way that I use to hold all of it lightly. Who knows? Maybe it was all just a fever dream. So I will start chronologically. So the furthest back life that I saw in great detail. And in that life, I was a dog that loved to hang out and lived at a monastery, at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. And the human who I loved so much in that life, the other blip of sentience that I loved so much in that life, loved the most in that life, was a monk who practiced there. And he would often feed me out of his own bowl, and sometimes invite me to sleep on the ground at the foot of his bed. And I just felt so much devotion to this monk. Just like many people who have pets, dogs, their dog really reveres that one human or maybe two humans, but really so clearly identifies a master to love in their life. I loved that monk. And I'll tell you one thing that is different from what I saw versus what I wrote in the book about my past lives is in the book, the dog dies a very dramatic death. But in the past life that I actually saw, the human, after the human dies, the dog just, all the color drains out of the dog's life. And the dog just lingers on the monastery grounds and is almost completely ignored, except by some junior monk who once in a while remembers to feed the dog a little bit and keep her alive. But for the most part, she just lingers and wastes away, and every day just counts down the hours, the minutes until she can also pass and rejoin her master in in whatever comes next after death. But the good news is that they do rejoin each other, and I'll tell you how all the characters, or how most of the characters, all the key characters, are reborn in life after I tell you about all of them. But one way that this life impacted me so much in this current birth that I have as Grace is I remember so clearly the first time I ever stepped into a Tibetan Buddhist temple. And I just felt this deep ache in my chest, this ache in my whole body. And I just started crying. And I turned to my sister, who was there with me, and I said, I don't know why. I just feel so much right now. And I feel so nostalgic. It's this sweet pain of nostalgia. And she said, maybe you are recalling something from your past life. So maybe I was recalling that life as a temple dog, monastery dog. And after seeing this life, I just felt like there were a couple jewels that I really harvested from it. And one was that even mosquitoes, flies, the most disliked, annoying blips of sentience on the planet, even they deserve compassion, maybe even loving kindness. And since then, I would also tag onto that even the ghosts, even the hell beings, any form of life at all, and even beyond life as we think of it, like with a pulse and with a breath, like any form of sentience, any blip of sentience deserves compassion, deserves loving kindness. And to be fully clear, I still highly dislike mosquitoes. I have both my legs are covered with mosquito bites right now. I think it is very annoying. And still compassion for the mosquitoes, loving kindness for the mosquitoes. And when we take our dog to the park, I know there is one field where there's many mosquitoes and one field where there's very little mosquitoes, and I will always go to that field with the very little mosquitoes, and still compassion for the mosquitoes, loving kindness for the mosquitoes. Those gosh darn mosquitoes. And same with the ghosts, same with the hell beings. Because it's hard to find someone who has never been a hell being in all of their past lives from the undiscoverable beginning, including me. I have also been a hell being. The Buddha was also a hell being at some point. And the other thing that I felt so clearly, the other lesson that I learned from seeing this past life, is that it's really actually not hard at all to make someone feel loved. I feel like a lot of times when people say and hear the word love, they think of grand gestures. But really, all it takes is to make that blip of sentience, whether it's a human, a dog, or whatever, just make that blip of sentience feel safe, feel seen, and that is love. Unconditional love. Just making them feel safe and seen. That monk really never expressed any grand gestures at all to the dog, just feeding her, giving her a warm, dry place to sleep. And next, I will tell you about after that dog finally died, and she was so relieved to die. Then I was reborn as a farmer, a country bumpkin. And I can also sense how this has reverberated into my current life because, I was born into a family that was firmly in the middle class and really high achieving academic environment. Grew up in Cupertino, home of all Apple products. And I have always really loved going to farms, working on farms, living on farms, fig farms, family farms. Uh, I have this knack for taming sheep, apparently. So maybe it has to do with this past life where I was a farmer. And the monk who took care of the dog also appeared in this farmer life where, the farmer had to live in this one tiny, tiny village in the countryside for all his life. But there were people who passed through the town, and including this band of musicians. And one of the members of this band of musicians came through and stayed in this town. In the book that I wrote, it was for about a week, but in what I actually saw, it was more like a year. And in the book version, it's much more dramatic. But in what I actually saw, the farmer would just go to like a riverbank or a lakeside beach, often to bathe and just to sit for a while. And this musician would also come to this lake or beach or whatever to rest and be by herself. And they actually very rarely spoke. And it took many, many months for them to even just linger a little bit closer together, just take a few more steps together. This was a long time ago, okay? Flirtation was very subtle. And then it took a few more weeks for them to even make eye contact. And I think they hardly ever said more than a couple sentences. But the farmer was completely head over heels in love with that musician. But the farmer cannot leave the land. The farmer is loyal to his crops, and the musician was part of a traveling band, so eventually she had to leave because she was loyal to her troop, to her family. So they couldn't be together. And that was the end of romance for the farmer in that lifetime. But the farmer did have love, actually a lot of love. He eventually adopted a village orphan, and they farmed the land together, and they came to have this father-son relationship. And actually, when the farmer died, the village boy, out of gratitude and devotion, made this vow to the farmer that for the rest of their births, for the rest of their lifetimes, all the way until Nibbana, the son, adopted son, would do whatever he could to take care of the farmer. And in the moment, the farmer was like, "Please don't make that vow. That is way too serious. That's too large of a commitment to make for all our lifetimes in the future." But the son made it anyway. And I guess I'll just tell you now, I have a feeling, and again, I don't know if this is true, but I have a feeling that the adopted son in that lifetime is my father now, my dad. And if that is true, then he has made good on his promise. And no parents are perfect. And when I think of my parents now, just only gratitude blooms in my heart. Only gratitude blooms in my whole body. And that is because of a lot of years of therapy and forgiveness. But I will say my dad has done so much to provide for me materially. And growing up, if there was ever anything I needed for my intellectual pursuits, my professional pursuits, he has made all of that happen. And I am so lucky and thankful. And even though no parents are perfect, he really did his best and also passed down to me such strong values of integrity and being there for the people that we love and valuing integrity above worldly gain. So, whatever merit I make in this life, I dedicate to my parents. I have like a merit retainer for them, so if I don't remember to dedicate merit to them after every time I sit or do whatever formal practice, I have a retainer for them. It just all goes to them. mom and dad, and I love them so much. So that is how that vow has shaped up a couple births later. What did I learn from that lifetime? One thing is that, we live in this culture where relationship love, like romantic love, is placed at like the top of this hierarchy of what will be meaningful and satisfactory in our lives. Or maybe if not couple relationship love, like romantic love, then maybe it's like parental child love. But after experiencing this life, uh, I felt so strongly that actually peace, like real, sustaining, deep peace, is the most important thing, far beyond romantic love, parental love. And that's something that really benefits me, like especially in those relationships with my partner. Like I think the fact that we're both so dedicated to finding that sustaining peace is actually what makes for such a healthy relationship. Because whenever conflict arises, we're going to face it and work it through it together until we find that peaceful place for both of us. And it helps me at work where, because the peace in my mind, like the real deep sustaining peace is the most important thing, then even if there's all these sources of urgency at work, manufactured urgency, uh, the peace is still the most important thing. And I can work more quickly, I can work more efficiently, but actually the fact that I'm not willing to compromise the peace in my body, peace in my mind, that is actually what in the end helps me work more quickly and effectively and efficiently. And I think the reason why at a certain point I had to tell my manager I don't want any more promotions. And then one more thing I felt so deeply after seeing that farmer lifetime was that, growing up in Silicon Valley, growing up in Cupertino, there's a lot of conditioning for kids to grow up to change the world. And, I went to this super high achieving academic school where it, it's so ridiculous to think of now, but a lot of people go to school, and even as I had my first panic attack about wanting to go and save the world when I was like 10 years old, wanting to go to a really prestigious university. And then, of course, I would have to found whatever startup and blah, blah, blah. I was 10 years old when I had my first panic attack about that. Um, but after seeing this farmer lifetime, I felt so strongly that actually, if in all your life, if all I did was just touch one other life so meaningfully, then actually that would be enough for me. Just one. And maybe that is somebody else's life, or maybe that is our own. And actually, now looking back at this, I really feel so strongly that the more we practice deeply in our own system, the more we awaken, the more we just naturally transform the lives of the people around us. And it's probably not going to be something you see on a resume, you know, it's not going to be a job title at some prestigious whatever, but, and, and by deepening our own goodness and our own wisdom, then we just naturally transform also the lives of the people around us. By caring about someone else's health, for example, Maybe they also start caring about their own health. They stop drinking by caring about someone else's peace of mind so deeply, so lovingly. Maybe they finally quit the job that has been quietly killing them for years. Maybe they completely changed their life. Maybe they moved from Silicon Valley into the mountains. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Let's move on. Then I saw the farmer died, was born into the life of a servant girl, sold from a peasant family into a city restaurant uh, so that her parents could survive a famine because there was just no other way. Because otherwise, the entire family would have died from starvation. And she just had this lifetime of working so hard and had to pay off the debt that was incurred when she was sold into that life of servitude. And just had such a lonely life. It felt like no one really cared about her, no close bonds of friendship, just one toxic romantic relationship. Yucky. But I'll tell you, that toxic romantic relationship lasted quite a while in the life that I saw for a few years, I think. In the book version, it's much shorter timeline. But I actually crossed paths with that person again, who that toxic romantic relationship was with. Crossed paths with this person in this current life as Grace, and yeah, the toxicity also reverberated through, but it only lasted 2 weeks in this life, so there's hope. One can learn. All right. So eventually, when after many a few decades of loneliness, I think some point in her late 20s or early 30s, she encounters the Dhamma and eventually ordains and lives the rest of her life as a nun. And one thing I'd like to point out is in both the lifetime as a farmer and the lifetime as this servant girl turned nun, they both rubbed shoulders or elbows, rubbed elbows with an anonymous arahant. And those who have fully awakened, from what I understand, they leave much lighter of an energetic footprint upon others. So it's harder to sense them in past life experiences. And it was after really sitting with those experiences for more prolonged periods of time that I detected that they were their presence, that they were there. And particularly in that lifetime as a farmer, that farmer had no education, was, how to say this politely, not very smart, just not very smart. Very well intentioned and humble and many other good traits, but not very smart. But just by rubbing elbows with this closeted arahant, he learned so much. Because I think there are two main ways to learn from someone who is fully awakened. One is to listen to their Dharma talks, and so much wisdom filters through then. But another is to just observe how they hold themselves. And the the more you can see them with when they're wearing less and less of a filter, the more interesting it is. Because, sometimes I've heard people say, like, I think arahants don't cry. I think arahants don't grieve. But then if you read enough stories and bios of arahants, or if you hear enough of their attendants talk about what they're like when they are the most unfiltered, then perhaps they do cry. Perhaps they do grieve. Uh, and then so that really helps us suss out what is attachment and what is just conditioning and personality, and what behaviors still exist after full awakening. But anyway, I think this farmer was not capable of understanding any Dhamma talks. I think this arhat actually in the farmer's lifetime did not even give any Dharma talks, but just by seeing and observing how this fully awakened being moved about the village, how quiet of a life they lived, how humble they could be, how harmless, how generous, and all of these other beautiful traits, I think that is also another way to learn deeply from an arahant. And that's actually, I think, the most beautiful, impactful thing I learned from visiting Ajahn Suchart in Thailand is, okay, gives, wow, I would happily bow to him any day of the week. I have listened to many of his Dhamma chats, and I have learned so much from them. And I think the most impactful thing I learned was just by just watching his behavior as we were standing in line waiting to offer our chocolate bars to him as gifts. Like, no matter who was bowing in front of him, no matter what he was doing, what he was saying, uh, even in the Dhamma talks in the Q&A when he was giving like a really serious answer versus in the offering line when he was uh, this little girl was so excited to receive a teddy bear from him, and she was jumping up and down, ecstatic about it. Like, no matter what, he just was completely equanimous. And I remember when we asked to take a picture with him, he consented. And then as we were all kind of getting up so we could pose around him for a better picture, he was like, nope, you stay right there. We can take the picture from here. And he didn't even turn to look at the camera. It didn't even have any hint of a smile. It was just completely equanimous. And I've seen in the Dhamma chats, there was some guy who started lecturing Ajahn Suchart, yikes, about the Dhamma, but he was just completely equanimous the whole time. And even more than any incredibly wise thing he said, just observing how equanimous he could be, that was the greatest gift out of many priceless gifts I have received from him. I'm so grateful. But anyway, these are more good reasons to visit the highly regarded teachers in our lineage, in any lineage. Okay, back to the servant girl turned Buddhist nun. Yeah, that lifetime has also, I'm still experiencing the effects of that lifetime in this birth as grace uh, in many, many ways. And one way is that I think because in that previous birth, there was so much training in all the ways of the Dhamma, including meditation. Then in this birth, meditation came quite easily to me. I sometimes get a little uneasy when I'm talking about things coming easily to me, but whatever. Okay, but in this lifetime, then I was able to just slip into deep meditation, even as a small child. I remember my parents driving me from point A to point B, and sitting in the back seat of their car and gazing out the window at the sky and realizing that I could do this funny thing with my mind where I could just kind of relax the thought process, relax what I would call now the conventional mind, relax the brain. And then the long car ride would suddenly become so present and pleasant. And I didn't know that such a practice was called meditation at the time. I was, 6, 7, or 8 years old, something like that. And then, especially with middle school, high school, I definitely lost touch with that practice for a while. But then when I picked up meditation again, in early adulthood, it felt so familiar to me, and I realized that I was just doing exactly the same thing that I was doing when I was a kid in the backseat of my parents' car. And what did I learn from that lifetime? I learned that, you know, everything, all the conditions of life that seemed so permanent at the time, especially because, as a servant girl, like that lifetime working in that particular restaurant was extremely unpleasant. And at the time, it seemed like it would just stretch on forever and that I would be a servant forever. But then it passed. And the toxic romantic relationship that I was in that caused me so much vexation at the time, and I thought I would never be happy, that passed. And it's all impermanent. Every stage of life, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And the other thing I learned was that sometimes things really work out better than we ever thought possible. I think as a servant girl, and again, maybe all of this was a fever dream, maybe none of it ever happened, and also maybe it did. So, as that servant girl, I never ever thought that I could have peace in the heart. And then I encountered the Dhamma. And I noticed this so strongly today, too, in this life, is that when we step back into the observer view and take our next step in the flow of the Dhamma, then things have that tendency to work out better than we ever imagined. And even if something is really unpleasant in the moment, we can flow with the Dhamma and knowing that the unpleasant conditions have arisen. But then things have this tendency to work out better than I could have planned, better than I thought possible. I had a glimpse of that servant girl turned Buddhist nun. Upon her death, I saw a glimpse of her disciples washing her body. It was nice to experience that secondhand. The love that she had for the disciples and the love that the disciples had for her. And in the novelization of all of this, the nun reaches full awakening at the end, but obviously that is not what actually happened and not what I actually saw, or else I wouldn't be here now. Uh, but I think it would be fun to tell you how some of the characters were reborn from lifetime to lifetime. So I told you about that toxic relationship guy was someone who I dated for 2 weeks in this lifetime as Grace. My father, or the adopted son in the farmer lifetime, then became one of the restaurant owners in the servant girl lifetime, and now is my father, who I love so much. I'm not going to tell you how I know this person in this current lifetime, but the abbot at the temple where I was a dog was then reborn as my mother in the farmer lifetime, and then was reborn as the other restaurant owner in the servant girl lifetime. And then the monk, my master in the dog lifetime, the human who I loved the most, was reborn as the traveling singer in the farmer lifetime, and then reborn as my favorite disciples out of 5 or 6 disciples in that servant girl turned Buddhist nun lifetime. And then is now my Kyle, my partner. And I think think some of the other characters, the other people I have crossed paths with in this lifetime, uh, but I have less strong of a feeling. And yeah, after a person dies, there's something that lives onward. I've seen both my grandparents on my mother's side. I have experienced their presence after they died. And my grandmother on my mother's side, I remember when we were at Wat Saptawi, there was a moment when Ajahn Ganha encouraged us to dedicate merit to our ancestors. And when I had my hands in Anjali and I closed my eyes, I saw so clearly, as if my eyes were open, that she was sitting next to me, her hands also in Anjali, her heart open to the flow of Dhamma. She was Catholic, by the way, but Dhamma is Dhamma, no matter what label you put on it. And then I don't remember if it was a few days after that, but there was another occasion when we were practicing and I had my eyes closed and I saw this image of her so inspired by the what we were seeing in Thailand that she was eagerly and excitedly leaving to go into her next birth as a human so that she could implement and practice the Dhamma for herself. And then my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, who I was actually not really close with when he was alive, kind of scared of when he was alive, but we have a pretty close relationship now. He's like always hanging out right here, watching my life like it's a Netflix movie. But he came to me in a meditation and told me that he was so proud of me. And he grew up in extreme poverty, lived for most of his life in extreme poverty and hardship, fled from China to Taiwan in the Communist War, was a soldier in the war, and in one episode of fighting as a soldier, every single person in his group died violent deaths besides him. Climbed the Himalayas, came down from the Himalayas. Anyway, that's the life he lived. Um, and he told me when he came to me in that meditation that if he had grown up with any kind of education at all, that he thinks he would have turned out to be just like me. And yeah, he's right here with me. And I've asked him sometimes, like, don't you want to go on to your next birth and practice well and practice toward awakening? But he's just there with his popcorn, watching my life. And I think he's going to be with me until my funeral. He wants to see all of it. And I've even seen my own funeral. And if you're still watching, then thank you for coming with me on this funny little ride about things I've seen that may be real and may be all fever dreams. But there was one time in a meditation when I saw my own funeral. And I am so much of an introvert that my first thought was, there are way too many people here. But at least it will be sunny that day. Be nice weather that day. And it's been really helpful for me sometimes when, sometimes life can be overstimulating, and sometimes it feels like there's a lot to do. There really isn't, we can just flow with Dhamma and just do one thing at a time. But sometimes it does feel that way. It does feel overwhelming. And it's really helpful for me to remember that vision I had of my own funeral and that it's in a really uplifting way. Like it's all going to end really well. The glass is already broken. The grace is already dead. And from what I can tell, it will be a life well lived. And I wish that for everybody who is watching, a life well lived. And that means a practice well practiced. So may we practice well. And thank you for sticking with me all the way till the end.